So here's the board gaming question of the day. That game, that title in your collection, or perhaps it's a couple of titles, one that you really enjoy. If I was going to say right now, pause this vlog, pull that title off your shelf, what would it be? And for me, it would be Runebound. And this is an example that I'm going to be sharing in this vlog. Taking that title, taking that board game and bringing the components, bringing the narrative, bringing the atmosphere of it to that top level, kind of blinging out your board game, kitting out your board game. And it's interesting to see how the industry has evolved, but hobbyists were always looking to take it to that next level. Now, one of the reasons why I am so involved in board gaming is the fact that I love the analog experience. I love this idea of when we set up the game and you're ready to go, it pulls you in slowly. It's like we step out of space and time, and that narrative, whatever it's going to be, in this case, Runebound or a dungeon crawler or perhaps a sci-fi title, you are in the game in the moment. Now, certainly that's true for digital games. There's a lot of digital titles that I enjoy playing, getting into video games and computer games. But that connection with analog, there's something about it. There's something about the physical interaction of dice, miniatures, components, seeing how they move and being forced to move them as you go through the various turns, whether it's playing solo or with friends. That's one of the things that really, really pulls me in on the immersion. So any chance that I have to up that immersion, to increase that immersion, I think is very, very valuable and really, really awesome to do, especially if it's a title that you regularly play weekly or monthly, or again, these top 5 titles that you're going to pull off your shelf. So certainly what we've seen over time, components have gradually upgraded. It's like back in the day when you had a cell phone and you actually had to pay for bandwidth. As soon as there's the jump to free bandwidth, no limit onto your data charges, everyone has to jump and move that. So what we've seen over time, similar in the board gaming community, as titles are published, as various publishers have increased the visuals of their board game in terms of art, in terms of components, in terms of card stock, it's just become the standard. If you want to remain competitive, that's how it's going to have to be. If you're a miniatures-based game, art aside and visuals aside, because that's kind of subjective, what makes a good-looking miniature and what doesn't, but the print quality of that miniature, the detail of that miniature needs to be up to a certain standard to even be taken seriously, and the technology has increased. So when I look at some of my titles from 2003, 2005, 2008, around there, compared to titles today, they're just better produced. There's just more of an expectation. And we would expect this, and this is certainly not a criticism of some of my older titles. But now we're seeing that break, and a good example would be Nemesis. Now, I know Nemesis is kind of a premium game, but it's premium, the retail version, Kickstarter version aside of all the extra components and upgrades. The retail version, another great example, Zia, Legends of a Drift system. We see components miniatures that are painted. We see custom dice. We see acrylic tokens, glass bead tokens, highly detailed printed cards, thick cardstock. These upgrades to the components, is it going to reach a point where cardboard life tokens just don't cut it anymore? We want the little plastic acrylic hearts. Now, some games come with the stock, but they also offer acrylic upgrades. Zombicide, I love Invader, I love Black Plague. You can go with the cardboard, you can go with the plastic. But we're seeing that slowly take shape. But when it comes to the stock board game, in whatever capacity, you can only upgrade this experience so far based on the manufacturer. Then you're going to have to jump in and get a little bit creative. And one of the things that we see is the replacement of regular dice with perhaps custom dice. So the game might come with a set of kind of standard generic D6s. You might invest in different colors for different attributes. You might invest in etched dice with a symbol on the one side or the 6 side, or perhaps even a set of dice for every single player. Zombicide, Black Plague, and Invader, I have a set of custom dice for up to 10 players. I know you can only play the game to 6 players, 6 actors, 6 heroes. That's what they say, but the number one rule when I play board games, everyone has a spot at my table. If you want to play, we're going to pull you into this hobby. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to roll some dice. We've done Invader with 6, 8, 10 players. We'll figure it out. But having a set of dice for every single player, that's an easy upgrade. Another really, really interesting upgrade is the replacement of gold or money in a game to physical coins. I think we saw this with a popular upgrade is Lords of Waterdeep. A lot of players there will upgrade to the actual D&D Waterdeep coins, upgrading that to a plastic or to a metal component if they don't have it. But what about taking it to that next step? Replacing miniatures, augmenting miniatures, and utilizing miniatures. Now, some games involve miniatures. This is where we're going to segment into Runebound, and then I'm going to turn over to you guys for your custom upgrades, and that's before we even get into inserts and token management. Runebound, the art looks fantastic. The card stock is fantastic. It looks good for a mass-produced Fantasy Flight game. So certainly it's not a premium game. Certainly it's not a boutique game, an elite game, but the production standards are very good. There are plastic miniatures, excellent detail for the various heroes in the game. But the monsters in the game, the bosses in the game, they are either a printed token of the end boss. In this case, in the core, we're looking at Margrath the Dragon High Lord or Vorakesh the Necromancer. There's a little token pog printed with that to represent that boss on the table as it moves across the realm. And then for the other monsters and action points, if it's zombies or heroes, there's kind of generic counter tokens. And they work, right? If you're fighting Vorakesh at various points in the narrative, he's raising an undead army. They take over one of the cities. You put down a marker token representing an infestation by zombies. If you have some of the expansions, the Spider Queen expansion, similar to Margrath, it's replaced with a Spider Queen token, and the markers are used to represent cities that have been taken over by the webs. It's functional. It works. But this is an example of if we can replace those tokens and those boss counters with actual miniatures, because they're used significantly in every single game. So it's a good investment that doesn't warrant the possibility of I'm going to go out and buy a miniature, but it's only going to show up like 1 out of every 20 games. No, these are going to be used every game, and they're an important part of the game. Let's build that narrative. Let's build that tension. Let's have all the spiders taking over the cities and have a giant spider for the Spider Queen. So in looking at that, it was kind of really easy for me because I have Descent 2nd edition. I have Descent 1st edition. I love the Descent titles. Those miniatures are set in the Fantasy Flight Terranoth universe, so the monsters kind of match. I have the spiders from Descent that I utilize and incorporate into Runebound 3rd edition. I have some of the spiders from the Lair of the Worm expansion. I pull those into the game. So looking and pulling in other miniatures, I find is a great way to replace cardstock tokens or cardstock markers if you're going to utilize that in the game. And if I did not have if I did not have Descent 2nd edition, I would have pulled in. There are many, many miniatures and many to scale based on whatever system it is to augment. And I would have done that with Runebound completely. My next step is to replace some of the life tokens and some of the counters with some sort of premium acrylic, just so it has a little more bite, just so as you're taking that damage and putting it down on your character card, it gets a little bit more real. It's going to have a little bit more of a real feeling from that perspective. So now I'm going to turn it over to you guys. That title in your collection, After you've decked it out with the appropriate acrylics and some other upgrades, and maybe you've painted your own miniatures, what's that next step? What's that next thing that we're going to build at, or that we can look at, that really brings that analog value to your game?